Hello, horse racing fans. Man, that Kentucky Derby was great. Very much appropriate for the 150th running. A true palate cleanser to the disaster that was last year. And now it's on to the Preakness. And the Preakness, well, the field is definitely not the largest, but it's actually a decent field with multiple really good horses in it. I'm excited to see what happens. So to start things off, we are beginning with the weakest horse in this Preakness field by far, Mugatu, which is kind of funny because the last in-flight movie I watched was Zoolander. Unfortunately, that's not going to help him here. This horse is at best a synthetic horse when he has performed, and when he's run on dirt, it's been utterly atrocious. He's also tied with being the most raced horse in this field, so you can make some argument that he's already exhausted going into this. He overall seems better on other surfaces, and would need, frankly, a miracle in order to get anything done. Something akin to the Rich Strike pace meltdown. So, easily toss Mugatu. Number 2, Uncle Heavy. Now, this is definitely a horse who has been disregarded for the most part for better ones, and I can see it, but there still are merits to this guy. Especially if the track on Preakness Day isn't fast and is instead something along the levels of muddy or good, because that's where this horse seems to thrive, with good closing victories in the Wait For It Stakes and the Wither Stakes on non-fast tracks that had some level of moisture to it. Also, he gets the addition of Irad Ortiz Jr., one of the best jockeys in America. That can't hurt, right? And I know he's coming into this race with a very weak performance in the Wood Memorial, but I'm willing to scratch out that race because he was right next to Deposition when that horse clipped heels and fell. He also was forced wide the whole way around, so he was never comfortable, so being right next to a horse falling definitely didn't help either. Of course he wasn't going to run his best that day. And Resilience ran half decently in the Wood Memorial despite beating lesser competition in that race. So while he definitely is outcompeted even on his best day, Uncle Heavy still has value to him, and even his weakest performance in his most recent start has an excuse. If the race turns up sloppy, I'd suggest giving this guy another look. Number 3, Catching Freedom. Now, I was not expecting to see another horse besides maybe Mystik Dan return from the Kentucky Derby and give the Preakness another shot, so I was really pleasantly surprised to see a horse as good as Catching Freedom try this. Now, Brad Cox is not the kind of trainer who would run a horse off a 2-week layoff, so the fact that he was so confident to run Catching Freedom this time around with no obligation to does say a lot about his confidence going into the Preakness. Catching Freedom is going to be a nice come-from-behind horse, and it's almost guaranteed that he's going to be flying late and getting a piece of the pie, as he's a relatively consistent horse. Even when he was a step below the best horse in the Kentucky Derby, he still ran well and got a piece of the pie. I mean, 4th isn't bad. He didn't really have any excuses, he was just simply better than that race. But with performances like the Louisiana Derby also on his side, he definitely is starting to come into his own. Earlier in the year, he was definitely a tyro with the way that he was unable to keep himself straight, but through the Louisiana and Kentucky Derbies, he's clearly showing a lot of maturity, and is still as consistent as ever. If he's able to get the front runners to tire themselves out just enough, he could fly late and maybe even win the whole race. And with him just outside of the main discussion talking points, with the main discussion being around Mystik Dan and Muth, you could also get a decent price on him, maybe 6 or 5 to 1. He's worth those odds. And speaking of that other horse, we've got Mystik Dan. Now this horse is a lot of things. I personally did not think he was going to win the Kentucky Derby because of his relatively worse-off performance in the Arkansas Derby, especially in comparison to his knock-your-socks-off Southwest Stakes, but we got the Kentucky Derby. So the things that definitely make me worried that he's probably not going to win this Preakness are as follows. He's never ran 2 good races in a row. He's already failed when running off a 2-week layoff before. And he wasn't even the best horse in the Kentucky Derby. After having everything go his way, what really saved him in the end was the fact that Sierra Leone and Forever Young were battling each other rather than battling Mystik Dan. If they had focused their efforts on Mystik Dan, they would have caught him, but instead they were too busy battling each other, bumping each other, knocking each other off stride. And even then, Mystik Dan only barely won. Now he's not going to have to worry about either of those horses, and also the shortening of distance from 1.25 miles to 1 3/16 could also definitely help him. And similar to Uncle Heavy, if the racetrack doesn't turn up fast, that could really go into his favor, although as shown with the Kentucky Derby, he doesn't seem to care. I'm just more worried that we're not going to see two good performances out of this horse because he's yet to do that in his career. Number 6, Seize the Gray, another horse taking the 2-week Derby to Preakness trip. However, he didn't actually run in the Kentucky Derby. He could have, he wasn't also eligible, but instead ran in the Pat Day Mile, an easier race and also a one-turn race. So some might say, well, can he do 2 turns? Most would say, yes, he can. He won a race in February around 2 turns, and was a decent third in the Jeff Ruby Stakes. The bluegrass we can simply throw out. He's alright at what he does. He can stalk, he can be near the lead, so if you want a horse who can challenge Muth, this might be one of the better chances you'll get, which isn't saying much. Maybe he'll continue to improve, but he always seems just on the outskirts of facing the top 3-year-old horses and succeeding. He has thrived by dodging those kinds of horses. He ran on the same day as the Rebel Stakes, which was won by Timberlake, and he won that allowance race, and then he ran on the same day as the Derby, and he won the Pat Day Mile instead, which clearly was the better race for him. And when he was right in the thick of it, he ran a alright Jeff Ruby Stakes, but was still distantly beat by Endlessly, and then he absolutely toiled in the bluegrass. This will be his race to really prove himself against mainstream company. Will he do it? I'm not so sure. And as we continue with Lucas's horses, we have Just Steel. Now, about 11 years ago, Lucas had a horse run in the Kentucky Derby and then win the Preakness, and that was Oxbow. But Oxbow definitely looked a bit better in comparison to Just Steel. Just Steel's 17th place finish in the Kentucky Derby is excusable because he got caught in a speed duel and basically had nothing left. But at the same time, after exhausting yourself in the 1.25 mile Kentucky Derby, how much are you going to have left for the Preakness? That we're going to have to find out, although it is important to note that when Just Steel rested off the pace, he got a lot stronger. That's how he was able to run a very credible second to Muth in the Arkansas Derby. So if they pull those kind of tactics, maybe he could run late and do something, but I'm not so sure. On his best day, he definitely has the ability to show a very impressive performance in second or third, but he always has 1 or 2 bounce races intermixed between them, and he never wins either. If there is a trainer to run the horse back in 2 weeks and make it work, I guess it could be Lucas, but I feel like Seize the Gray is probably a better option, because he's better, more forwardly placed, which is statistically favorable for the Preakness Stakes, and he's putting his best foot forward. Meanwhile, Just Steel is recovering from a very bad race, and one that also could definitely have taken something out of him. Number 8, Tuscan Gold. Now this horse is definitely the wise guy horse of this field, which could be worrying for some people who want to get some money out of this race because he might be too good of a smart thing, and then have odds too low to really work with. Despite being quite lightly raced, he fits a very good Preakness archetype, and that is the Chad Brown horse. Chad Brown ran very well in defeat in the Kentucky Derby with Sierra Leone, but he's always had a better track record with the Preakness. Cloud Computing and Early Voting both won it, and Blazing Sevens came within only a neck of winning last year's Preakness from National Treasure. And Cloud Computing specifically fits an almost exact record archetype to Tuscan Gold, only having 1 career victory and running 3 times, and those 2 defeats both coming in stakes company. So we've seen the likes of a horse like Tuscan Gold succeed in the Preakness. He also ran quite credibly in the Louisiana Derby, being the best of the horses who were near the pace, only being denied by 2 late closing long shots. He also in that race defeated well-respected horses like Track Phantom, and Antiquarian recently went on to win the Peter Pan Stakes, signifying how strong the Louisiana Derby was. So, all systems seem to go that this horse is the perfect Preakness-type racehorse. The only thing that bettors are going to have to worry about is that 2 people will know of this not-so-well-kept secret. And finally, number 9, Imagination, the other Baffert horse, and the only horse in the Preakness field that I actually got to see in person when he ran in the, well, what was left of the San Felipe Stakes. He'll be the other front-running-ish horse or stalker in this race, but I find it very doubtful that Baffert would send these two horses together and have them battle against each other and potentially take themselves out. I just don't think that would make any sense. So I feel like one horse is going to be the dominant leader and the other is going to be the follower. And I'm assuming that Muth is probably going to do that, or the other way it's going to work is that Imagination is going to be the pace setter and Muth is going to reap the benefits. Still, Imagination is going to probably come in clutch if Muth can't get the job done. And he's also a very consistent horse. In 6 starts, he's never finished worse than 6th, although he has been beaten or has been in close combat with horses that are quite weak. Wind Me Up didn't run very well in the Peter Pan Stakes after fighting tooth and nail with Imagination in the San Felipe, and Stronghold was a okay 7th place in the Kentucky Derby itself and was able to outdo Imagination. So take that for what you will. So with that concludes this year's Preakness Stakes. So who am I going to pick? I'm going to lean towards Catching Freedom. You can definitely call me an idiot if Mystik Dan or Muth get the job done, but I'm going to try and lean away from the 2 main favorites this time around and try something else. I think that Catching Freedom is the most consistent horse with the best chance of pulling something together away from those 2. Down Under, if things get really muddy, I'm going to lean towards Uncle Heavy as my Down Under horse, but if things go fast, then I'm going to focus on Seize the Gray and Tuscan Gold. So if things turn up fast, it's going to be Tuscan Gold, Seize the Gray, and Catching Freedom. If things turn up sloppy, Uncle Heavy and Catching Freedom. Take that for what you will. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Horse Racing Analyses. And tell me how you're going to be playing this year's Preakness Stakes. I'm not sure if I'm going to be covering the Belmont, but we'll see what happens. See you guys next time.